The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council was more silent than it had ever been. Normally filled with buzzing conversation, hovering datapads, and the low hum of translators, it now sat in a heavy pause. Representatives from over 60 alien civilizations were gathered, each with worried eyes and restless hands. Screens floated above the room, showing the same message in dozens of languages: THRE, XDOMINIO, NDAI, NDS, URRE, NDNDNDNDLU, ITAINSEV, NCYCLAS, INONCOM, PLIA, and CEMEA, WAR. The Threks were not just another rival species, they were an empire, war-born and forged in centuries of expansion, known for wiping out worlds that dared defy them. They had never lost a battle, and they had never sent a warning. The message alone was a mercy few expected. As the council members argued, some calling for a show of strength, others whispering about surrender, a single voice remained silent. Captain Elena Ward, the human delegate, stood still with arms folded behind her back. She watched the chaos unfold around her without moving, without even blinking much. She'd been assigned to the council as a formality, a representative from a young and curious species that had only recently reached interstellar travel. Most saw humans as new blood, interesting, but not important. Until now. As debates turned to shouting, and some even accused others of secretly aligning with the Threks, the entire chamber shook as a loud alarm rang. A Threx vessel had entered orbit not to attack, but to watch. The message was clear. The countdown had begun. Fear spread like cold air across the room, and the council master banged the central podium, demanding order. It was then that Elena finally stepped forward. Her movement alone silenced the noise. She was calm, dressed in the simple black uniform of Terran diplomatic service. No medals, no rank markings, only the small silver emblem of Earth over her chest. All eyes turned to her, expecting her to speak on behalf of the humans, perhaps to suggest an alliance, or beg for time, like the others had done. But Elena didn't offer a plan. She didn't ask for support. She simply said 5 words, clearly and softly, as if they were enough. I'll handle it. Alone. A wave of disbelief passed through the chamber. The Zairi ambassador blinked with all 8 eyes. The crystalline veil representative tilted its shining head in confusion. Even the council master looked unsure if she had misunderstood, but Elena repeated nothing. She didn't explain herself. She simply requested one thing: immediate clearance to speak with the Threx Dominion directly. No military backup. No fleet support. Just her. The room erupted. The Duranti accused her of arrogance. The Krill ambassador warned that any contact could be seen as surrender. The Rotina whispered among themselves that humans might have secret tech they hadn't shared. But Elena didn't respond to any of them. She stood like a statue, unmoving, calm, unreadable. Eventually, the council master, seeing no better plan, gave reluctant approval. The vote passed narrowly, and just like that, one Terran vessel was cleared to cross into Threx space. As the council watched her depart, many believed she wouldn't return. Some thought she'd be killed. Others assumed she would beg for mercy. Only a few dared to believe something else. On board the small diplomatic ship, Elena sat alone in the command chair, watching the stars pass through the view screen. Her hands rested gently on the controls, not guiding the ship, just waiting. As she approached Threx space, alarms warned of targeting scans, weapons locks, and perimeter checks. But no shots were fired. The Threx, it seemed, were curious. One unarmed human coming directly to their war fleet? It was either a trick or something worth seeing. Her ship was directed to land on the Threx command station, a fortress the size of a moon, surrounded by dreadnoughts. She exited the craft alone, walked through a steel corridor watched by silent, armor-clad warriors, and entered a massive chamber where the supreme strategist of the Threx Dominion waited. He sat upon a black throne, flanked by elite guards with glowing war maps floating in the air. His eyes, sharp and calculating, studied Elena with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. She bowed slightly, then looked him directly in the eye. There was no fear in her posture, no hesitation in her voice when she spoke. She didn't come to surrender. She didn't come to threaten. She came to talk. The supreme strategist allowed it, more curious than concerned. He had faced fleets, assassins, and diplomats in his long career, but never someone quite like this. Elena offered him a story won from Earth's history, a story of a near war, not between galaxies, but between nations. A story of how destruction had been avoided not by strength or numbers, but by understanding, by choosing to speak when silence would have meant war. The strategist listened, though at first with only mild interest. But as she spoke, something in his expression changed. He began to lean forward. His guards exchanged glances. And though the war map still floated behind him, their lights seemed dimmer. As her story ended, she placed a small device on the table, an old Terran data core, filled with footage, simulations, and records of Earth's most fragile moments, and how humans had come close to ending themselves before choosing another way. She said nothing more. The strategist stared at the device for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than expected. He dismissed her, but not with mockery, rather, with a slow nod and a strange look in his eyes. Elena was escorted back to her ship. No threats were made. No promises either. Just silence. The kind of silence that means something important is happening, but no one knows what yet. When she returned to the council days later, she carried no trophy, no treaty, only her calm expression and 5 more words. It's handled. For now. The room didn't erupt this time. It didn't shout. It simply stared. Because somehow, without weapons, without armies, without threats, a human had walked into the fire and come back without being burned. The silence of space was broken only by the slow hum of Elena's diplomatic ship as it drifted toward the heart of the Threx Dominion, a vast, ominous fortress of metal and shadow that floated like a dark star in the void. This was no place of friendship or peace, but a city built for war cold, imposing and filled with the silent threat of destruction. Elena felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she showed none of it. The council had watched her leave with mixed emotions, hope, fear, disbelief, and now they waited, holding their breath, wondering what fate awaited their lone human envoy. The ship passed through layers of security, unarmed and unescorted, its small size almost insignificant against the sprawling war station. Yet, inside that fragile shell was a determination that no weapon could match. When Elena's ship docked quietly in a vast bay, guards in heavy armor boarded without a word. They expected a prisoner, or at least a diplomat begging for mercy. Instead, Elena stepped out alone, her calm face unreadable beneath the bright lights of the docking chamber. The cold metal halls echoed with every step she took as she was escorted through endless corridors, each lined with statues of ancient Threx warriors and banners stained with victories and blood. Soldiers with glowing red eyes flanked her, watching her every move, their weapons ready but never drawn. The air was thick with tension. Everyone knew the story of those who had tried to deceive or fight the Threx here, and how quickly they were crushed. But Elena walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced worse dangers on Earth and lived to tell the tale. At last, she was brought before the supreme strategist, the leader who had orchestrated the Threx's conquests and whose word was law across their empire. He was taller than most, with skin like cracked obsidian and eyes that burned like coals in the dark. He studied Elena with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, expecting arrogance or fear, but finding neither. She stood straight and spoke simply, her voice steady and clear in the grand hall that had heard the roar of countless battles. She requested a private conversation. No guards, no weapons, just truth between two leaders. The strategist hesitated, but then agreed. It was the first time in decades that the Threx had granted such a request to an enemy or a stranger. Alone in the chamber, Elena unfolded her plan without a hint of aggression. She did not offer threats or demands. Instead, she told stories of Earth, of humans facing extinction, of wars so close to breaking out that only courage and understanding stopped them at the last second. She spoke of how humans, though small and seemingly fragile, learned that power was not just in weapons, but in ideas and will. The strategist listened, his sharp mind calculating every word, every gesture. At times he frowned, at times his eyes narrowed, but he did not interrupt. He had never encountered an opponent who fought with stories instead of swords. As Elena finished, she presented a device, a small cube, ancient by Terran standards, but filled with records of Earth's past, simulations of war avoided, and the quiet strength of diplomacy. It was a challenge wrapped in a gift, a puzzle for the strategist to solve. Hours passed in silence as he examined the data. Guards shifted uneasily, sensing the tension but unsure of its source. Finally, the strategist broke the silence, his voice low and filled with a strange respect. He admitted that humans were unlike any enemy he had faced, not because they were weak, but because they were unpredictable. They did not rely solely on power. They used wisdom and restraint, qualities that the Threx had long forgotten in their march of conquest. Elena did not celebrate. She understood this was only the beginning. Her mission was not to win a battle, but to stop one from ever starting. As she was escorted back to her ship, the fortress seemed less threatening, or perhaps she had changed. The cold metal walls no longer felt like prisons, but like reminders of what could be saved. Her return to the council was met with silence. No cheers, no accusations, just an uneasy peace. Elena's words were few, but her message was clear. Sometimes the strongest victory comes not from war, but from the courage to walk into the enemy's den and speak without fear. And in that silence, the galaxy waited, wondering if the war that had seemed inevitable might instead be avoided, because one human had chosen to face the darkness alone, and not with a sword, but with a story. Back at the Galactic Council, Elena's return was marked not by fanfare, but by a deep silence that hung heavily in the air. She carried no treaties, no gifts, no promises, only a quiet confidence that unsettled many. The other delegates, still reeling from her solo mission into the heart of the Threx Dominion, crowded around to hear what she had to say, but Elena was careful with her words. She knew that the power she wielded was not in commands or fleets, but in stories and memories, things the galaxy's warlike species had long forgotten. As the council chambers emptied and whispers spread, Elena sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the data core she had left with the supreme strategist. The recordings were not just history, they were warnings, lessons from a distant world that had once stood on the brink of annihilation. She remembered the moment she first encountered the device, a relic from Earth's darkest days, when humanity had almost torn itself apart with weapons of unimaginable power. The story was simple, yet profound. Humans had learned that true strength lay not in destroying others, but in understanding them, in choosing restraint over revenge, in offering peace when others expected war. The data core contained simulations of war games, where entire cities were wiped out, only to be rebuilt stronger, where enemies became allies through shared hardship, where hope and trust were forged from despair. It was a lesson that the Threx, with their thirst for conquest, had long ignored. As Elena prepared to share this lesson with the Council, she could feel the weight of centuries of mistrust and hatred pressing down on her. Many species saw humans as Na'vi, too young to understand the realities of galactic power. But Elena knew better. Humans had survived countless threats, not by overwhelming force, but by adapting, by learning from their failures and rising again. She called a special session, inviting leaders from across the council, including those who had doubted her mission. In the Grand Hall, she began recounting the forgotten lesson not as a speech, but as a story, vivid and alive. She spoke of a time when Earth was divided by endless wars, when cities burned and millions fell, and how a few brave leaders chose to end the cycle by daring to speak, to listen, to forgive. Her voice carried across the room, painting pictures of hope and resilience that even hardened diplomats could not ignore. As she spoke, the room grew quieter. The delegates shifted in their seats, some exchanging doubtful glances, others nodding slowly. The message was clear. Humanity's strength came from a place the galaxy had rarely seen, a strength born from humility and courage. But not everyone was convinced. Some whispered that such ideals were luxuries of a weak species, that the galaxy's future depended on power and fear. Elena welcomed the challenge. She proposed a new way, a chance for the Council to use the same wisdom, the same lessons, to find peace before war could begin. To back her words, she shared the data core's contents, showing simulations that allowed leaders to witness the consequences of their choices, to see the destruction of endless war and the fragile beauty of peace. The simulations became a tool for understanding, for negotiation, and for hope. Slowly, minds began to change. The supreme strategist of the Threx Dominion, though distant, sent envoys to observe these sessions, their expressions unreadable, but their attention unwavering. The lesson was not lost on them, even if it was uncomfortable. Behind the scenes, secret meetings took place, quiet talks between species that had been enemies for centuries, inspired by the possibility that the future did not have to be written in blood. Yet, beneath the surface, old fears and ambitions still simmered. Some factions prepared for war in case peace failed, unwilling to trust even the humans' strange wisdom. Elena knew this was only the beginning. The lesson was fragile, a spark in the dark that could either grow into a flame or be extinguished by the cold winds of distrust. She continued to work quietly, reaching out to individuals and groups who were willing to listen, sharing stories of human resilience and hope. Each conversation chipped away at suspicion, building a fragile bridge between worlds. But she also understood that the greatest challenge lay ahead not in winning arguments, but in changing hearts. One night, alone in her quarters, Elena reflected on the path humanity had taken. She thought of the countless sacrifices, the mistakes, and the moments of unexpected kindness that had shaped her people. She realized that this forgotten lesson was more than history. It was a promise, a choice every being in the galaxy had to make. Would they cling to fear and violence, or embrace the courage to say no to war? As the days passed, signs of change began to appear. The warships of the Threx Dominion pulled back slightly, their weapons powered down but ready. Other species sent messages of cautious hope. The Council itself began drafting new agreements, treaties not just of alliance, but of understanding, designed to prevent conflicts before they could start. Elena watched all this with guarded optimism. She knew that the road ahead was uncertain and that the peace she sought was delicate, held together by trust that could shatter at any moment. But she also knew something else, that the moment humanity chose to say, "I'll handle it," alone and unarmed, had changed the course of the galaxy forever. In the quiet halls of the Council, where once only threats and power had spoken, now there was room for a different kind of voice, a voice that whispered of forgotten lessons, of peace earned through courage, and of a future still unwritten. And so, the galaxy waited, holding its breath, as the fragile hope of a new era began to take root in the hearts of even the most hardened warriors. The Galactic Council, once a place filled with constant turmoil and suspicion, now buzzed with a different kind of energy, one that was harder to define. Elena's words and actions had created ripples small but growing across the many worlds gathered in that grand chamber. While some leaders embraced the idea of peace, others quietly resisted, wary of change and clinging to old grudges and fears. In the council chambers, the debates were no longer just about weapons and alliances, but about trust, forgiveness, and the possibility that even the darkest enemies could find common ground. Elena moved through this shifting landscape with quiet determination, knowing every conversation could tip the balance toward war or peace. Yet, behind the scenes, shadows stirred. Not all species welcomed the fragile hope Elena represented. Secret meetings took place in dark corners, far from the public eye, where those who profited from conflict plotted to unravel her work. Some saw the Threx Dominion's tentative steps back from aggression as weakness to be exploited, not peace to be honored. As the Council worked to draft new treaties, whispers of sabotage and betrayal grew louder. Elena found herself navigating not just diplomatic channels, but webs of intrigue that threatened to undo everything. Her trust in old allies was tested as rumors spread that spies lurked within the Council itself, sending information to enemies and stirring unrest among the species. One evening, as the Council convened for a crucial vote on a new peace accord, the room was thick with tension. Delegates exchanged sharp glances, and the air was heavy with unspoken fears. Elena stood before them, ready to speak, but before she could, a message interrupted the session, a warning from the Threx command station that several outlying systems had reported unusual military activity. The room fell into chaos. Was this a sign that the Dominion was preparing for war despite the peace talks? Or was it the work of those who wanted to sabotage the fragile trust? Elena's heart pounded as she called for calm, urging the council to wait for facts before jumping to conclusions. The next days were filled with uncertainty as investigations revealed that rogue factions on the edge of Threx space were mobilizing without official sanction. These groups, driven by fear and old hatred, sought to provoke a war that would destroy the progress Elena had fought so hard to achieve. With the council divided on how to respond, Elena took it upon herself to visit the disputed systems. Traveling through star systems scarred by past conflicts, she met leaders and citizens who had suffered under the shadow of endless war. Her presence alone brought a flicker of hope. She listened to their fears, their pain, and shared stories of humanity's own struggle to break free from cycles of violence. Slowly, she convinced them to stand down, to choose dialogue over destruction. Each peaceful encounter was a victory, but Elena knew the deeper battle was still ahead. Back at the council, her reports were met with mixed reactions. Some praised her courage, others accused her of naivety. But the greatest challenge came from within. Political factions that benefited from war's chaos began pushing harder against the peace process. They spread doubt about Elena's motives, questioned humanity's role in galactic politics, and worked to sway undecided members. The council's halls echoed with these conflicting voices, the echoes threatening to drown out the fragile hope Elena carried. Despite this, Elena refused to give up. She understood that peace was not simply the absence of war, but a constant effort to overcome fear and mistrust. She gathered allies who believed in the vision of a united galaxy, working quietly to build bridges between old enemies. In private meetings, she brokered agreements, shared intelligence, and helped establish communication channels that reduced misunderstandings and hostility. The Threx strategist, once a distant and intimidating figure, became a cautious partner, joining in these efforts with a mix of respect and calculation. Together, they demonstrated that even the most hardened foes could find reasons to listen and learn from one another. Still, the threat of sabotage loomed large. Elena knew that if even a single spark of violence erupted, it could ignite a war that no diplomacy could contain. She kept watch for signs of unrest, ready to act swiftly to calm tensions. The galaxy was holding its breath, caught between the hope of peace and the fear of destruction. And amid this fragile balance, Elena's quiet strength became a beacon, not just for humans, but for all who longed to break free from the endless cycle of war. As the council prepared to vote on the final peace accord, her voice carried across the room, steady and full of resolve, reminding all that the moment to choose was now. The echoes of her words resonated beyond the chamber walls, reaching every corner of the galaxy, carrying with them a promise that war could end if only they dared to say, "I'll handle it." The galaxy held its breath as the moment of decision arrived, the council chamber filled with a heavy silence that was louder than any war drum. The peace accord, shaped by months of delicate talks, secret meetings, and Elena's relentless effort, was about to be voted on, a decision that would either open the door to a new era or slam it shut forever. Outside, star systems waited, armed fleets stood ready, and histories of violence threatened to repeat themselves. Elena stood in the center of the chamber, feeling the weight of countless lives resting on the edge of a single choice. Around her, leaders of many species whispered, debated, and wrestled with fear and hope alike. Some clung to the old ways, believing strength could only be proven in battle. Others dared to imagine a future where words and trust were the weapons that protected them all. Suddenly, a message arrived from the Outer Rim reports of a major fleet mobilizing near the border. For a moment, panic gripped the council. Was this the spark that would ignite the war no one wanted but everyone feared? Elena's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. The message was incomplete, confusing. She demanded immediate clarification and sent trusted envoys to investigate. Hours passed like years as the council waited, tension thick enough to choke the room. Then came the answer. The fleet was not moving to attack, but to participate in an unprecedented joint exercise, a show of strength and unity between old enemies who had decided to trust Elena's vision. The news spread like wildfire, igniting cautious hope and deep relief. It was a sign that the galaxy was ready to try something new, to face the future together rather than divided. The vote proceeded. One by one, the leaders stood to voice their support or opposition. Arguments were passionate and raw. Elena listened, never interrupting, understanding that true peace required hearing even the hardest truths. When the final tally was announced, the peace accord passed by a narrow margin, enough to begin the fragile work of building trust, but not without risk. Elena's heart swelled with quiet pride and a deep sense of responsibility. The war that many had predicted, prepared for, and feared had not come. Instead, the galaxy had chosen a different path, one of dialogue, patience, and cautious hope. In the following months, Elena traveled between worlds, overseeing the implementation of the new treaties, helping to dismantle old military outposts, and fostering cultural exchanges. Former enemies shared stories and meals, finding common ground in their fears, dreams, and desire for survival. It was not easy. There were setbacks, small conflicts, and moments of doubt, but each challenge was met with a growing resolve to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. The Threx Dominion, once known only for conquest, began to reveal a new side leaders who embraced diplomacy and scholars who studied human history with respect and curiosity. Elena's relationship with the Supreme Strategist evolved from cautious partnership to genuine cooperation. Together, they demonstrated that even the most bitter rivals could learn from one another and forge a future that belonged to all. Yet, Elena never forgot the fragility of this peace. She remained vigilant, aware that beneath the surface, old fears and ambitions still lingered. Secret factions plotted, distrust simmered in hidden corners, and the galaxy was a place of endless complexity. But for the first time in generations, hope was stronger than fear. The moment humanity said, "I'll handle it," it had sparked a movement that showed the galaxy another way, proof that courage, wisdom, and the refusal to give in to violence could rewrite the future. As Elena looked up at the stars from her ship one quiet night, she felt the truth of that moment settle deep inside her. The war that many expected had never come because one human had chosen to face the darkness, not with a weapon, but with a promise to try, to listen, and to protect life wherever it could be saved. And in that promise, the galaxy found its greatest strength, the hope that the future could be written, not in blood, but in the bonds forged by those brave enough to say, "I'll handle it."